My name is Michael Cummings, and excited that you're here at this Blitz 21, this virtual conference. You guys are part of the sport I love to death, and so really excited to be here. So when JAWKU had asked me to kind of come on and talk about something that I hold near and dear to my heart, I said, you know what? One of the things that I think we overlook as coaches, or maybe we don't have time for, is something that is so important, and that's the idea of identifying fatigue, and not only identifying fatigue, but then managing fatigue. And so that's what I chose to speak on today. Some of you might go, what the heck is he talking about? What is fatigue? And so I'm going to get into it a little bit. I'm going to throw some research at you and some studies that'll help us better understand just the sheer gravity of what this is and kind of move forward. So my pedigree, I've been a strength and conditioning coach for a long time. My name is Michael Cummings. I've worked at the high school level. I've worked at the collegiate level. I've worked at the professional level. And then I've worked for corporate America, militaries and governments, all by way of some component of warm-up, training, recovery, and anything there in between. So happy to be here with you guys today. So we'll get, I'm gonna take a look at the slideshow, and then we're gonna talk about a couple things here. So one of the things I wanna look at is just understanding that we have the same vocabulary. So let's talk about recovery for a minute. What is recovery, right? It's one of the basic principles of our training methodology, and it has two primary roles. The first of these roles is we're going to monitor our athletes' adaptation to training and stress so that our appropriate recovery strategies can be determined, right? Sometimes the S&C coach does this, but a lot of times the coach himself at a high school level or a D3, D2 level has to do this himself. The second component of that is then the coach selects a specific recovery technique or strategy to minimize the residual fatigue from training or competition. It's completely up to us. I have a 12-year-old son. He has a soccer tournament this week, in 2 weeks. Coach came to me and said, there are 5 games in 36 hours. Like, what can we do? So he's putting that on me. So now I get to pull out different recovery techniques and strategies to help them minimize their fatigue that is about to happen. And so that becomes part of a dad's journey, right? So we can kind of get into that a little bit. So moving on, what I want to show you guys is, sorry about the graininess of this. I pulled this offline, but if you're able to have adequate rest and recovery, we're able to have, and I'll show you a little bit later, this idea of something called the supercompensation model. So if you look at this, if you look at the line right here, this initial performance level, this is your baseline. Once you train, you break down the athlete, and then you employ a recovery strategy that helps them get above the training, right? Again, think about how a muscle is built. You break down that muscle, it goes through the 3 phases of recovery, inflammation, recovery, and then regeneration. And then we hopefully build stronger than we started. And then we break down that tissue again and rebuild, or break down that system again and rebuild, break it down again. And that's how we have improvement. Without adequate rest and recovery, we will not have improvement. So if we look at what adequate recovery leads to, we're going to have motivated athletes. They're going to have good, healthy brain and neurological function. Obviously, the mechanical, they're going to recover their muscle strength. They're going to actually be faster and have faster processing speed. They're going to have a decrease in injury potential through resilient ligaments and tendons, increased muscle glycogen, more energy storage within their muscle, and then a regulated, not a decrease, but a regulated cortisol or hormone level, which helps increase energy and decrease fat storage, things like that. And then better memory, right? Ability to understand plays and focus and all of these different cognitive abilities that we have, attention, task switching, working memory, active thinking, everything that you want your players to do can happen with adequate sleep. And that's when you start looking at products like, you know, these wristwatches or these rings that measure sleep. It's a huge study right now, a great field of study that is sleep and what it does at helping the brain push out all the plaque and help us become better human beings by processing everything a lot easier. Lack of sleep is one of the worst things that can happen to athletes. In fact, one of the head strength and conditioning coaches for the NBA talks about the poisons of, what does he call it? He said, you know, alcohol, Adderall, and goodness, what was the other one? I think, yeah, maybe just alcohol and Adderall. The idea of everyone's so energetic and then using alcohol to kind of take them down as this downer. And what happens there is that we have this synthesizer, this fake energy, and this synthesizer, this fake decline. And so it just really is this ugly cycle where we're unable to put our body through its proper sleep patterns. So this next graph takes a look at training without adequate rest, and you can see that it's the inverse of what we just saw. Here's your athlete with this initial performance level, this baseline being here. The training looks the same. The training breaks down the system, but they're unable to recover adequately. Look at the gap between where they are here and what we saw in the last one. And so then they train again and go here and train again. So a lot of times people talk about overtraining. It could be overtraining, or it could be under recovering. And so now we have this decreased performance level. So even with proper training or the same amount of training, if the recovery doesn't get us back to 100% or above 100%, we have this decreased performance level. So we have to take that into consideration if we're doing our 2-a-days and things like that. We have to make sure our athletes get enough sleep, enough time to recover. So moving on, I'm going to glance over here every once in a while to look at if there's any questions. Go ahead and ask questions as we go through, but I'm going to leave enough time at the end to do a Q&A. So non-adequate recovery then is going to lead to increased risk of injury and reduced pain threshold, right? We're a little bit more emotional. Our mechanical systems are not resilient enough, but also we're not thinking clearly. And so we can be making dumb mistakes like, you know, standing up too high, not creating a big base of support on a cut. So inertia takes us over and there goes an ACL, right? Just from lack of thought. That lack of thought could happen because of this decrease in recovery. Greater susceptibility to sickness, right? I caught a cold. You know, a lot of people during Hell Week get sick. You know, oh, sorry, I can't make it. I got the flu. I got this. I have that. And that's because their body is run down and they're not putting forth the right recovery methodology to make sense. Reduced physical and psychological performance. After some hard days, they're probably, you know, shoulders slumped over. We're going to get into the signs and symptoms of this. Reduced motivation, the learning ability and memory are declining. All the cognitive abilities that we would want through problem solving and active thinking, all of these things start to decay pretty greatly. There's an increase in anxiety, irritability, and mistakes. All of a sudden, your star player, the one who's nice to everybody, starts picking fights, starts popping off at you. All these things could be related to non-adequate recovery through irritability and stress. They could be gaining weight. Their body weight is going up and down, increased body fat percentage due to irregular cortisol levels and out of whack hormones, and then reverting to old habits. You spend a ton of time teaching them one type of way to run, through acceleration, through lateral movement, whatever it may be. And all of a sudden they're reverting back to old habits again because it's not sinking in, right? They're not getting their head in the game. So the graph that I talked about, let's walk through it. So this is the same baseline that we talked about. We're going to talk about the blue one first. So this training adequately, because that's what we looked at, where we break down the system. So there's this fatigue phase, and then there's this recovery phase that takes us above the initial baseline. That component here is called the supercompensation phase. And that's really ideally what we're looking for in each of our players. And then you can just continue, you can go back to that graph where we saw it increasing to have those performance gains. Now go ahead and take a look at this red, when there's some overtraining or training too hard. So this big workout dip, this large fatigue phase, the recovery phase, even though we think it's adequate, is inadequate. And so we get maybe back to baseline, but we certainly don't have these supercompensation benefits. That's maybe plateauing, that's staying even at an equal state. There is no growth, there are no gains. And then there is a method of training too easy as well, where the workout just is not difficult enough. And so the recovery demands don't need to be that high. If we don't train hard enough, we're not going to have that nice big bump over baseline to help us make those market improvements. Now, this graph has been studied for a long time. You can see Seeley in the GAS model as a component here. There's a lot of different people who have studied this over the years, but it all remains the same, that through training, there needs to be this adequate recovery phase to get us to a place where we're having these additive recovery modes. And that's up to us, guys. Like, as strength coaches and coaches, we are guides. We have to guide our players to do the right things. We can't expect them at a younger level to do it, even at an older level. I'm working with some Major League Baseball guys today, and they're coach, what's next? What are we doing? So it's almost hand holding and guiding them to have the proper methodology that they need to get where they need to get. Kind of this hand holding program mode, which sometimes we can do and sometimes we don't have the time to do, but we got to make best efforts. And I've been in all shoes, guys. I've been there working 60-minute sessions at the high school level with 81 kids. I had 82 kids a couple of years ago at the high school strength training program. It was absolutely insane. And you just do the best you can with what you got. And so trust me, this is an idyllic situation. You guys might say, hey, coach, this is crazy. What you're asking us to do, like, I would love to do this, but that's a pipe dream. That's fine. I understand it. Maybe take 5 minutes of this and try to implement it a little bit, or at least understand it to the point where you can try to curate it and plug it into that program that you're developing. Okay. So let's just quickly understand what stress and recovery is. So we look at what stress is first. It's any load applied to any system which is going to disrupt homeostasis, right? And here's the cool thing. Is that just through training, mechanical training, or is that cognitive and emotional well-being as well? The question I have is, does the body know the difference? Does the body know the difference between being physically beaten down, psychologically beaten down, emotionally beaten down, neurologically beaten down? The body doesn't know the difference. It affects us the same way, okay? But there is a differentiator, and we're going to talk about that later, how to identify which one is it and what the right strategy to help our athletes get through that is, okay? Because the physical stress, that's the easy one. That's the one the athlete has that body map to understand, right? They get why they're beat down. Coach killed me. We did this many suicides. We did this many burpees. We did this many, squat through, whatever it is, their bodies were beaten down. And they understand that. What they don't understand is, man, coach got on me and he said some real personal things. At the same time, my girlfriend was beating me up too. So they don't put those things together, but that next day they're in a terrible mood and they can't quite figure out why, because it's a younger athlete. Now, as we start bordering then on the psychological aspect of fatigue and that athlete not performing at their best because of those things that are coming in. So the body doesn't know the difference between that physical load and that psychological load. So what is recovery then? Recovery is taking the body back to its normalcy, back to homeostasis, and then allowing opportunities to provide regenerative interventions. You guys may have heard what recovery is and what regeneration is. And we'll get into that a little bit, just by way of vocabulary words, right? Recovery is the strategy that we employ to get back to where we want to be, having our cellular regeneration or cellular recovery, and then regeneration is the strategies that we employ to help that body recover 100%. So these are kind of the 4 basic stressors, guys. There's more. There's a lot of sports psychologists out there that'll talk about more, but this is the relationship between them. You have the mechanical, okay? The mechanical is what the athlete understands. It's the load on muscle and the support structures. Then you have neurological. Neurological is the load on the CNS, or the central nervous system, and then its peripheral nervous systems, okay? That's neurological. Then you have metabolic. That's the load on the system that produces and stores energy, okay? And then we have the psychological, which is the load on the psychological state, the mood and the focus. That's kind of what we talked about in the 2 examples before. We're not going to get into mechanical loading because I think that we have a good idea of that. One of the great ways to mitigate the mechanical is through different techniques like massage therapy and different things like that. These massage guns are just an awesome way at mitigating that type of stress. Eating, drinking, water, all those ways that we know how to help someone recover. So we'll just mostly focus on 3 items that we don't really talk about. And they're so important because they probably happen more at the high school level, the collegiate level, and actually would say the professional level too, than just simply the mechanical, okay? And so that's what we'll get into. You have the good stress and the bad stress, right? So we want to have a lot better use stress, the good stress. We want to decrease the bad stress or the distress in the hopes that we can get our athletes to have optimal performance, okay? And that's kind of the balance that we're looking for. So I just wanted to kind of level set on what recovery is and what stressors are before we move on. So are there any questions to this point that we can take, just a few minutes answering before we move on to fatigue? I'll leave it open for just a few seconds here. All right, no questions yet. Awesome. Okay, so let's move on here to fatigue. So that's an easy sign of fatigue, right? And that's probably mechanical fatigue. So let's move on here to, it's really important to me that we establish the baseline for evidence-based research supporting the things I'm talking about. I think it's important that anybody who speaks on something that they're about to say some sort of protocol or some sort of program that fixes something, a regimen, that there needs to be some science backing it. And so I want to just talk about a couple of these ideas, and then there's a works cited page at the end of this that will talk more about where this came from. So I'm going to spit these at you pretty quick. And then if there's any questions past that, we can talk about research, or I can email you the studies that were done here. So endurance performance was reduced when subjects were mentally fatigued. All right, so mental fatigue affected endurance. Mental fatigue did not induce any change in the cardiorespiratory or neuromuscular parameters, but increased the subjective perception of effort, resulting in a reduced time to task failure. So mental fatigue in this study didn't change what was happening at the heart. It didn't change what was happening at the neuromuscular or the nerve to muscle parameters, but it resulted in loss of perception, or the ability to perceive stimulus declined, okay? And that becomes incredibly important, right? Your ability to be able to react quickly to something, that's mental. And I'm going to show you a really cool tool that we can use that helps us test mental performance towards the end of this. So mental fatigue affects the ability to perceive or predict what's happening in stimulus, in space, and in sport. Mental fatigue impairs physical performance. Mental imagery leads to muscle fatigue and diminished performance in isometric exercise. So that's just another one. So there's some isometric exercise that a lot of our linemen will go through, right? When you're in this constant push position, it's in essence this isometric thing. And if there's a lapse in this muscle fatigue, it's gonna, or if there's this mental decay, it's gonna show itself by diminished performance in isometrics. This one was football related. Fatigue in a football context has been investigated from a neuromuscular and metabolic perspective, right? Metabolic meaning energy systems, with relatively little scientific attention examining the impact of mental fatigue on performance. So that's the one thing, and this is why I want to talk to you guys. There's not a lot out there of people studying mental fatigue in athletes, yet it's happening all the time, with the exception of the military, right? It's been suggested that team sports such as football place more stress on the brain than any other activity. If you think about how quickly things happen in short bouts, maybe 10 seconds, it talks about knowing you're going to get hit, hitting somebody. It talks about being afraid of what can happen if you get injured, all the different social pressures put on you, your team relying on you, your coach relying on you, you having to have insane motor abilities, multi-directional, change of direction, acceleration, top end speed, hand-eye coordination, your ability to change direction in and out of space, your ability to tackle somebody coming at you like a freaking freight train, right? There is so much stress that's put on an athlete during these things that it is one of the most aggressive sports and taxing sports on the brain. So super important to note that as you get into it with your athletes. And then mental fatigue can affect many aspects of football performance, including football specific running, technical skill, and decision-making performance, kind of what we talked through. Okay, so that's the research that's been done on it. So now let's get into kind of the lion's share, or the bulk, or the meat of what I wanted to talk to you about today, which has to do with coaching observations, and then signs and symptoms of these responses. So here are the way that athletes can talk to us, okay? They can have direct communication. We can read, this is the way that we can observe an athlete's non-adaptive or non-verbal or verbal communication. Direct communication with us. We can read their body language. We can see their performance. We can see if it's psychological or not, like their mood, their focus, or a lot of you veteran coaches out there, you just know. You have a gut feeling, you have a sixth sense, you just know something's not right. So direct communication could be listening to the coach saying something like, man, I got heavy legs. I don't feel so good, coach. Oh man, I'm sore. Ugh, my body aches, my stomach hurts, right? That's direct verbal communication. Body language. They can have dark circles under their eyes. They can have their facial expressions kind of not into it, or one of those things when we're given instruction. They could be pallid or pale. They could be slow to respond. When we ask them to get on the line for something, they could be real slow getting there. Walk to different drills, okay? Performance, poor skill execution, slow acceleration off the mark, heavy feet, poor decision making. They don't finish a task. They get there, and then when it's over, as before it's over, they just kind of peter off. They don't complete that task. The psychological, low motivation, low concentration. They can be aggressive. They can have low self-confidence. They can be self-deprecating. I suck. I'm terrible. I'm quitting. I'm awful at this, right? And then the sixth sense that a coach might have, they might know that they're not sleeping well, that there's stuff going on at home, stuff going on in their relationship, poor eating habits, family member that's sick, any one of these things that could be happening for these athletes. And so we'll get right into what we talked about. So here are the characteristics and the methods of recovery from metabolic fatigue. Guys, take a look at the main causes of metabolic fatigue. Our training session lasts an hour or more. They all do, right? So there could be some metabolic fatigue there. Taking part in several, even shorter sessions per day. Okay, so we're breaking it up into several sessions, but they're shorter, okay? It can be cumulative when training and performing over a number of days, Hell Week, 2-a-days. All of this can sap our energy systems during that. How does an athlete express that? The athlete fatigues sooner than normal for him or her, so based on that baseline. Or an athlete struggles to complete a session or an event. They are just wiped. What can we do then? This is the important part. What can we do once we've identified that? Again, we can rehydrate and refuel. You're going to see this a lot. Food and water is kind of the panacea for all of this. Rehydrate and refuel before, during, and after the training session. You can use contrast in and out of water if that's available, cold to hot, pool, spa, cold plunge, things like this, or other active recovery strategies. And because we're talking about the energy system, the metabolic system, to have a meal within 1 to 2 hours of training, and then also monitor hydration. Guys, dehydration is such an important factor when we work with these young athletes. A lot of them are at school all day and they forget to drink water. Once they're there, we're going. We don't have a lot of time. We don't send them on a lot of water breaks. That water directly affects their muscles, and it directly affects the nervous system. It directly affects so much in the body, right? We have to stay hydrated. We have to stay focused in that, and it's usually due to water. So that's metabolic fatigue. So let's move on then to neurological fatigue, right? Main causes: high intensity, short duration sessions, high intensity being the key here, with complex skill execution, okay? So if you're into this cognitive training, or you're into these abilities to train the body and the mind together, or you're putting together these complex drill systems, know that that's taxing the brain way more, and taxing the nervous system way more than simply running patterns, okay? So anytime you add X's and O's, complex X's and O's, anytime you add something that's new or novel, or they haven't done it before, that's a newly learned task. That's going to take way more out of their neurological system. So we have to be cognizant of that. Also, when you put athletes against each other and you compete, that increases that neurological system, because they're on point, right? They're sympathetic. They're dialed in. They want to win, and so that adrenaline pump gets them all super hyped. We need to make sure that we're knowing that we don't do contest after contest after contest, because it's just too much for that athlete. Or low intensity, high volume, involving a lot of repetitive movements. Sometimes it's low blood sugar levels. Sometimes it's high pressure training involving rapid decision making and reactions. Maybe you guys have some of these cool, like Blaze Pod, or some of these cool lights that are flashing, and you're looking at these things back and forth. A lot of that is high pressure. Knowing there's scouts out there is high pressure. Knowing that, like, that game's on the line, if this practice is the last one leading up to something, that's high pressure. And then anything that involves that predictive, high, quick decision making also is high pressure. Okay. Also, the other one that could do it, guys, is poor motivation, monotony of training, emotional factors and injury. Someone whose knee hurts, somebody who is having these emotional factors, or if practice is just plain boring. Ugh, we're doing that again. Take your laps. Ugh, that can all weigh on that. How do they express it? They reduce localized force production. So off the line, it isn't powerful. Why? Nervous system, neuromuscular. Nerves are fast, muscles slow. So if they have a slow neuromuscular junction, they're going to be slow off the line. which means they're going to have a very weak ground contact force, or an increased ground contact time. They can't turn over. They can't get their foot off the ground quick enough. They can have slow feet, slow acceleration, and poor technique. They can show a lack of drive, a lack of motivation. Their head can be in the clouds, dark circles under their eyes, right? This is all signs of just, neurological fatigue. I'm just spent. Here's the hardest thing with neurological fatigue. The athlete has a hard time recognizing it. They don't know why they don't feel good. They just feel crappy, okay? What can we do? Again, rehydrate, refuel before, during, and after after training. Within 5 to 15 minutes of training, get them on a massage. Get some of these muscle blasters on them, right? This one's from JAWKU, who's sponsoring this session. They got muscle blasters that you can get fired up on you. So there's different techniques on the fatigue muscles. Later that day, you can look at more massage. You can look at cupping. You can look at different things to help them kind of decompress the muscles and feel a sense of like ease. Another really great thing, and this should be number one, chill out, listen to music, take their mind off of the task at hand, rest, and then a steady intake of carbs and protein. Okay, really try and refuel in a way that's not going to make their hormones or their blood sugar levels fluctuate too much. Nice and steady, okay? So that's neurological fatigue. The last one we're going to talk about today is the idea of psychological fatigue, okay? The main causes of this are going to be lack of team cohesion, personality conflicts. They don't like the coach. The players are fighting. You're trying to win out the other person's position, competitive pressures, parents, grades, fighting, the venue sucks. You don't have the right cleats. It's cold. It's too hot. Your COVID environments, hormonal, they're going through puberty, relationship sucks. And also main causes, disruption of normal routines. So they just moved. You're playing somewhere else. They're not getting the right sleep. The meal times are thrown off, or adapting to new climates and conditions. All of these things can have psychological issues. And here's the other thing with this one too, guys. The athlete doesn't know what's going on. They don't understand why they're feeling what they're feeling. And so we can help see this. Here's how they express that. Loss in self-confidence or self-esteem, poor interaction, deterioration in communication with teammate and coaches. Their body language is anxious. They got a negative attitude. They're not sleeping well. They take a lot longer to warm up. They're making a ton of unforced errors, uncommon to what the athlete normally makes. They're fatiguing sooner than normal. They want to just give up, right? All of these things, they don't want to be out there. They're picking fights with other teammates. Okay, these are all expressions of that psychological fatigue. So what can we do? We can focus on the process, right? Not the outcome. Don't focus on what they're supposed to do. Just focus on the process. That takes all that stress away and doesn't give them another thing that they have to accomplish, right? We can debrief by identifying 1 to 3 things that went well, maybe 1 to 2 to 3 things that need a little bit of work. We can take the mind off training. This is my favorite. All of you guys have favorite coaches out there. Favorite coaches have the best stories in the world. If you see a guy like this, someone going crazy like this, bring him in. Hey guys, bring it in, take a knee. I just thinking about this story real quick. Let me just tell you this story, right? Take control of that situation. Take their mind off of it by offering up a cool story, a funny story, right? And then help them, challenge them to switch off 10 to 15 minutes before bed. There's an app on your phone that you can switch to warm light instead of blue light to help them decompress better. You can talk about maintaining body temperature. Don't be too hot, don't be too cold. And then during play, right, make sure they're hydrated, make sure if the venue's crazy, they have sunglasses, sunscreen, mitigate time on phones, like all of these types of things that could cause the psychological stress. You have to just help manage that. Okay, so those are the 3 types of fatigues that athletes might have. And guys, once you've been here a long time, you kind of get it. You know those players. And so hopefully on this one, we just can kind of understand the idea of the causes. I get that you probably understand the expressions, but then there's some recovery strategies for you to hone in on and really focus on getting the best out of those athletes. Okay, so one of the things that I do, I just want to show you what I call the athlete hack. JAWKU is a really cool company, and they have this a timing device. So two things that we talked about when we look at this athlete that is actually decreasing in reaction time and decreasing in speed, maybe I don't know. So one thing that I can do is I can switch on this quick app. I'm going to just show you right here because it's really cool. And the reason I do this with all my athletes. I can hit this ready button here. I can have them run a 5-10-5. So I'm going to run it here. The athlete hits their button. They run in front of it once, run in front of it twice. This will beep on, and it'll give them a score. Now, it'll give you a beep, 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 like ready, set, go, which is random, and then they move. Oh, there it is. So what they're actually running to is it's measuring reaction time. And then I'm measuring their total time. I can measure an athlete in literally 15 seconds from the time I open my app, the time my athlete runs, and then I can baseline them, okay? So I can basically say, all right, he ran that 5-10-5 before in 5.3 seconds. Today, he's at 6.7. I don't even have to tell him how slow he was. Say, hey man, get on the line, give me a 5-10-5. His reaction time is usually in the let's call it like 200 or 300 milliseconds. Now we're in like the 400 to 500 milliseconds. Okay, so it's his reaction time slow. His 5-10-5 is a good, is a good second or two slower, or maybe just a full second slower than what I baselined him at. Now I don't even have to get into it. Like, hey, what's wrong with you? Did you hear about a fight? I don't have to diagnose the psychological, neurological. You know what I can just simply do during this session? I can unload my athlete. I can basically say in my head, there's something going on with this athlete, and I can just unload them a little bit. Okay. If I needed to test the entire team, I could probably do that with an assistant coach in 3 minutes. How are you guys? Man, they're like 80% of what they normally are. Awesome. I can decrease intensity or decrease volume for that day to help give that back. So this is my athlete hack. Whenever I feel like I'm identifying something, but I'm not sure, I'm going to run them through a reaction time test, and I'm going to run them through a 5-10-5 using my JAWKU speed here, and boom, easily I know what to do with them. So literally, I use this thing daily with my athletes. Such a cool device. So that's kind of like the time I have for that. I don't know if there's any Q&A or if I went over. So I'll just kind of end here with any Q&As. I'll flip over here real quick because here's my works cited just so that I can get that on the record so that you guys can take a look later if you want to walk through any of those ideas of how fatigue affects athletes. There's my credentials or my how to get a hold of me there. Let me just see what's going on with this little chat function. All right, so no questions. I think I'm at time, so I just want to thank JAWKU for having me. I want to thank Hudl for having me. Again, I'm Michael Cummings, or Coach Cummings. Happy to be here with you guys today. And really, I wanted to present this as a way for you guys to take care of those athletes. They're so important, and this is just going to help them be, superstars for the rest of it. So thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again soon.